Well, good evening once again. A special 2-hour broadcast far from our normal time slot on this Memorial Day, day 132 of the Biden administration. The president indeed marked this national holiday with a deeply personal remembrance and a passionate defense of democracy. And that's because this Memorial Day 2021 comes at such an uneasy time in our nation's modern history. Biden began the day at Arlington Cemetery with Vice President Kamala Harris, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, honoring those Americans who died on battlefields. After laying a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown, Biden spoke of his late son, Beau, and reflected on the fallen veterans who he said made the ultimate sacrifice to protect our democracy.
Each and every day, democracy itself is in peril. Here at home and around the world. What we do now, how we honor the memory of the fallen will determine whether or not democracy will long endure. Democracy thrives when the infrastructure of democracy is strong. When people have the right to vote freely and fairly and conveniently. When a free and independent press pursues the truth founded on facts, not propaganda.
Now to why it's such an uneasy time in our democracy. The president's very words come as several states are in the midst of passing laws that will restrict voting in our country. A legacy of the falsehood that the 2020 election was somehow rife with fraud, somehow stolen. Late last night, Democrats in the Texas state legislature staged a walkout to stop a sweeping Republican overhaul of state election laws. Their move meant that last night's session lacked a quorum, the minimum number of lawmakers required for a vote before the midnight deadline. Republican Governor Abbott, who supports the restrictive voting bill, has already indicated he will call for a special session of the legislature to restart this whole process. Democratic Texas lawmakers say they will be ready for that.
We have plenty of tactics and strategies at our disposal, and we will fight every single day to protect the sacred right to vote in Texas. We know what happened in Georgia. We know what happened in Florida. And if they steamroll us here in Texas, they're just going to march all across this country until they've made it very hard for everyone to vote.
Meantime, all the way in the east in Washington, Democrats on Capitol Hill are trying to figure out their next move after Republicans on Friday blocked the creation of an independent commission to investigate the 1-6 riot. The New York Times reports it this way. Senate Majority Leader Schumer and Speaker Nancy Pelosi are now planning their own committee investigations into the attack. Pelosi could also set up a select committee focused solely on the attack, handing Democrats unilateral subpoena power and a much longer timeline to investigate whatever they want. Democratic Congressman Jason Crow, who served in Iraq and Afghanistan and then famously witnessed the 1-6 attack from the balcony in the gallery, says his caucus needs to find some way to get to the bottom of what really happened on that day.
This has to get done. I am sick of playing the game of whack-a-mole with GOP members in the Congress. Every time we, address one of their concerns, another one pops up. We just can't continue to do that forever. We need to get answers.
Today was also the first holiday with the pandemic seemingly in retreat in our country, with restrictions largely rolled back and over 51% of adults now vaccinated. There were crowds just about everywhere the weather would allow it. There's still much work to be done, though. The president has set that goal of 70% of American adults to be vaccinated fully by July 4th. That's a number the experts now say should be very achievable. And Peter, I'd like to begin with you. Given the life you have led in this country and overseas, given all the stories you have chronicled as a journalist, how bracing, how striking was it to hear an American president declare our democracy in peril on this Memorial Day 2021?
Well, I think what we've learned in recent times is that the democracy we all thought was pretty well cemented is in fact fragile. The institutions, the norms, the standards, the traditions that we believed were rock solid in the United States have their vulnerabilities, just as we've seen in other countries around the world. I spent 4 years living in Moscow, where I was a correspondent for the Washington Post. I traveled and reported from the Middle East. I've traveled from countries all around the world. And we've seen, I think, in recent times, stories here that I would have only imagined we would have covered as foreign correspondents. And I think that's why you're right, that today has a certain poignancy, because the people who fought and died to protect this country, whose memories we honor today, did so with the idea that they were, defending a robust and healthy democratic system, one I think that we do need to continue to protect and guard, whether it be on the battlefields or in our society today. And that's, I think, one thing we all focus on today, no matter what party we're in, whether in the journalism, whether in government or politics. We give thanks for those who have stood up for us. We think about the role that we ourselves have to play in making this a more perfect nation, as they say.
Abby, to Peter's last point, that somehow brings this story to you because it brings the story to Texas, and the prong of this that Republicans in that state are busy and trying to achieve. Tell us how long Democrats can stave this off. How long can the impact from a walkout last, and what power the governor and Republicans have regarding a special session?
Well, the special session is called by the governor. Otherwise, Texas actually has an incredibly weak executive. But the how long is really not the specific question. It's when. So the governor, there will be a special session in the fall, almost no matter what, to account for redistricting and the census delay of that. But the governor's, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick is urging him to call one in June. So it's a matter of when do they pick it up again, in June or the fall. And it's very unlikely Democrats will, in the end, be able to override this. And in some ways, this bill could get worse for them. And so it's very much up in the air. But I think it did inject some enthusiasm into the state party, into national Democrats to have a cause specific on this voting rights issue to jump onto.
I want to return to this topic with you in a moment after we hear from Neil. And Neil, we've asked 30 different versions of this question to you and the former feds who we rely on during times like this. What power does the federal government have? What power does the Department of Justice have when Republicans in legislatures are working so hard and in some cases passing laws signed by the governor to restrict voting?
So before getting to that, Brian, I think there's a bigger point here. There's a forest, and this forest, I think, unites a lot of what we're talking about tonight, not just Texas and this state, but the January 6th Commission, Biden's remarks you just adverted to. And the name of it is that the Republican Party has become an anti-democracy party. And when the Democratic Party was named and originated, I don't think anyone thought it'd be controversial to be like in favor of democracy. Who would be against that? But now we know that you have to view this Texas vote in light of so much else that the Republican Party has been doing, like a concerted effort in Georgia and other states to roll back voting, a slavish devotion to a filibuster that bears no relationship to the filibuster our founders knew, that's totally empowering of a small minority. You've got a party who's scared, heaven forbid, to have people vote in Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. You've got a party who's hell-bent on getting their nominees to the Supreme Court to strike down legislation that they don't like that's been passed by a majority of people. This is an anti-majority party in the end. And it's a collapse party. It's a party that's lost its moral ground. It's like the USSR in the Cold War. Yes, they've got bluster and strength and insults, but they don't have any purpose anymore. And so to answer your question, because of the Supreme Court decision in 2013, the federal government is fairly limited in the powers it has. I argued the case in 2009 that saved that part of the Voting Rights Act, but it was reversed in 2013 by a 5-4 vote. And so right now, pending in Congress is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would restore that act. And so when Texas tries to pass a bill like this, it would require pre-clearance in Washington, D.C. by a court or by the Justice Department. That's the way stuff's operated since 1965. But now it isn't because of that new Supreme Court decision. So we need that law passed. Without it, I do fear we're going to have more and more antics like this from a party that's bent on these antics.